Okay, I think we'll get started, and if people find, they'll just join. Joseph isn't here today, just a heads up, but yeah, any questions, just speak up or type in the chat. So basically the topic for today is, first, there was something I didn't finish last class about like combining HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I'll go over that really quickly, and then we'll move on to like some more advanced topics, which I'm really excited about. So for today, I really don't expect you guys to like um, remember how to like hands-on code any of this. It's just um, getting a better understanding of what's out there. And really, when you start using these tools, a lot of them are like packaged or other people will set them up for you. So the really important part is just to understand how they're working, or even just in general, what they are. Okay, so with that said, let me share my screen and we will get started. One sec. Why is this? Okay, there we go. So so I'm currently in VS Code, Visual Studio Code. It's just a free online code editor that you can download from Microsoft. It's like basically it does everything that Replit does, but I just prefer it. A lot of people prefer it. So what I have here is actually a like a piece of code that's pre-written, and this piece of code is actually here, let me get rid of that so we can focus on just this part. So what you're seeing right here is actually not HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. I don't know if you guys noticed, but upon seeing this, it looks the most like JavaScript or some sort of other backend programming language. It doesn't have the tags, elements that are indicative of HTML. It also doesn't have the selectors, although this might seem like one. So I guess, yes, this kind of looks like CSS as well, but this language is actually TypeScript, and TypeScript is very similar to JavaScript. It's just another language for web development, basically. And the reason that I'm showing you guys this is because we talked about how to integrate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. For example, putting a link tag into the HTML for the style sheets. If you remember something like this, and then we would have a reference, we would have like styles.css, we would have a like a relative, like what would you call it, etc. And then you would have like not styles, script tags. So double script tags, inside of which you can write actual JavaScript code in your HTML document, or you can provide a source attribute and say, for example, main.javascript, and import JavaScript code for your functionalities this way. Now, that's just a quick review of what we did last time. And if you remember, the only way that we accessed the HTML document within CSS was through those selectors. And the only way we accessed it through the JavaScript was by, at the very start, using the document keyword whenever we wanted to add, whenever we wanted to create a new variable referencing an element within the HTML. However, you will see that's typically what people will use. But the only other example that I can think of is if you use or read other languages like TypeScript, where, so I'm in basically like, think of it like JavaScript, what I'm in right now, and it'll specify two things. So quite similar to JavaScript, you're going to have some variable. Think of this like the document keyword, and I'm selecting this HTML document. So like whatever it's called, right? I'm going to be taking the file path, the file destination, the path, assigning it to essentially this document keyword. And from now on, I can manipulate this to reference my HTML document. And similarly, I'm creating another variable that references my CSS path or my CSS file destination. And the other thing that I really wanted to point out is that when you're working with JavaScript or a lot of these backend web development languages, you're often going to come across keywords that are some variation of the word file. And so these, you can't tell just from file, like whether it's a HTML or a CSS, but sometimes these keywords will be used in place of specifying, okay, this is going to be HTML, this keyword is going to be my CSS style sheet. So 3 things. First of all, sometimes JavaScript instead of HTML is the language that ties all of these components together. And so, well, I guess that was one thing. And then the other thing is the file keyword. So just pay attention to like when you're dealing with variables that are, if you remember when we talked about variables in our JavaScript lecture, those complex objects. So not simple primitive types like an integer or a string or a Boolean, not those, but a really complex object that someone else has defined that has its own methods and properties and attributes and all of those. So that's what file is. And so just pay attention to those variables because sometimes they will reference HTML or other CSS JavaScript documents. Okay, with that out of the way, today we have a whole list of topics that I want to go over. So for those of you who joined a bit later, what we're doing today is just covering a bunch of advanced topics. I don't expect you guys to remember how to hands-on code any of this. It's just things that you might come across as you start doing web development. And really the most important thing is just to get an understanding of it, because oftentimes people will have set it up for you, or it's packaged, or there will be really precise instructions on how to use them. So for today, just focus on understanding the concept and seeing the demonstrations that I'll show you guys. Okay, so one of the first things that I want to talk about is you'll see that today's lecture is structured just like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, like these 3 topics. And I chose an advanced topic for each of the languages to talk about. So first, let's talk about, well, let's see. Okay, since we're talking about JavaScript, the order doesn't really matter. Let's start with APIs. So APIs, I don't know if you guys have heard this term or not. APIs are essentially what enables you to, in your code, reference something else on the web. And that's a really broad way of talking about it. But for example, if you guys have ever seen a website or an app or whatever that has a map feature in it, right? You might be on Yelp or some other like restaurant review site, and there will be a little interactive map in there that's just like Google Maps. And should be told that is Google Maps. The way that it's showing up on someone else's website is because they've used an API. They've used, you might call these tools also like a widget. So widgets, APIs, they're just tools used to take the functionality of an existing website and insert it into yours. That's all an API is. Now, the specific like mechanics of this is a bit more complex, but for today, just if you take away nothing else, just remember that the API is what enables you to essentially take the functionality of another website, another service, and insert it into yours. Now, something important to note about this is that you can't do this with every single website. Like I'm not going to be able to go onto the website, open whatever I want, and take their functionalities. APIs are something that the website that we're talking about right now, that the website in question creates and then offers to users on the web. So I have to be the one to go out and find, okay, let me actually go here, show you guys. So if we go, so first of all, this is W3 Schools, the website that I was talking to you guys about. It's really, really good for all things web development. But just trying to see if they have an API demo. Okay, I thought I saw one before, but apparently not. No worries though. So just remember that you have to search up available APIs. Now let's just do a quick Google search, right? Google Maps, right? The first result is going to be like the actual Google Maps. And okay, now if I add APIs, you'll see that the first result is Google for developers. It's, let's just open this first. So this is just one of the many, many APIs out there. And as you can see, this is catering to the developers, to web developers who want to put this functionality in their website. And there are a few key components of this. So let's see, I don't really like this website, but what they're basically, the first thing that you need to take away is that there's often going to be some sort of like a password or a key. It's often called an API key. So this key is essentially your password to establishing your connection with this website. And think of it like an identifier. So with any API, you're going to have an API key. And the second thing that you're going to need is you're going to need to know exactly where this API is relative to your actual code. So notice how I keep on talking about using another website's functionalities. So APIs are going to be part of JavaScript. It's not going to be placed in the HTML or the CSS. In fact, oftentimes you can use an API without ever editing your HTML or your CSS. It's simply another function, think of it that way, that's being put into your JavaScript. So I know today I'm making a lot of generalizations and simplifications, but really that's all it is. So we talked about a few weeks ago when we were talking about JavaScript in our lecture, how you can define a function and how a function is essentially like a packaged tool. You give it some input and it does its thing inside and it spits out an output. And APIs are really just a really, really, really complex function that someone else has already written for you. In this case, for example, using Google Maps, if I was creating, for example, like my own website, if I opened a store and I created a website and I need users to see on the map where my stores are, well, I'm feeding the API, this function, an input of my address. And what it's outputting is quite complex. It's just outputting like an image, an interactive map with my address marked on it. But really, it's the same thing as any function. So once you have that API, just plug it into your JavaScript as any other function, call it like other functions. And that's basically all it is. Now, another thing to know is that I talked about this being like a function, but the way you access it is obviously going to be different from any function that you define in JavaScript. So this is what the documentation is for. And Google Maps here, for example, this first one, the simple maps a JavaScript API. If I click on this, it'll show you, well, okay, there's a ton of things on the sides. But what you want to focus on whenever you're looking at any API is first, how you're going to integrate it into your code. Is it something that, for example, needs its own file? Is it something that you plug in like a function? And then the other really key thing is somewhere in the documentation, it's going to tell you how do you establish that connection with it, so that API key. And then finally, the most important one, or just as important as the others, I guess, is how do you actually call the function, right? Where is your input going into it? Where is your output? So for an API, just remember, it's like any other function. And the only things you have to keep track of is the input and the output. Someone else has written this function. You're just using it like a tool. Okay. So with that being said, let me show you an actual demo with an API. So going back to VS Code, I've stopped using the Replit. You guys can feel free to if you guys want to, but I just prefer this more. So I've created this beforehand. This is a demo using Google Books. And this is an API that Google has put out as part of its like digital library movement or whatever. So basically, they've created like a database of a ton of books online, and it provides a lot of functionalities. So that's the other thing about APIs. I talk about them like functions, but the API is the tool. There's going to be many, many, many functions in it. For example, this books API that Google has provided, I can search for a book. I can given an author name, for example, show me a list of the books that they've written. There's a lot of functionalities in here. But today I'm just going to show you guys, if I open this document, what it should do is output, or sorry, ignore the background noise, but what it should be outputting is some result to my query, my search input of Harry Potter. And so I just want to see like what's in this library that pertains to Harry Potter. Now, before I actually show you guys, just as a bit of quick review, let's go over this HTML document and actually see what it's doing. I didn't put any associated CSS or JavaScript, but basically I'm creating, so notice how in the head, I don't have all that meta stuff right there. That's bad practice if you're going to be doing like online web development, but locally I just excluded that for simplicity. Now my actual content, see, is all within the body. And first of all, I'm creating a div, so a section, but notice it's blank because I haven't, this entire website is supposed to be showing the results of a tool that I haven't used yet. I'm not putting any there from the very start. I don't know what it is. And so that's literally all of the content right there. The rest of this is a script tag. So see here, this is actually the what would be in a separate JavaScript document. I just decided to put this in here so that it would be easier to read. So notice how here I'm creating a function of how to handle the response of whatever is being given to me. And so don't worry about that right now. And in here is just for a variable I, an integer, while I is less than like the length of the responses, how many responses there are. And this just means I equals I plus 1. So just a typical for loop. Don't worry too much about the semantics of this. I'm just cycling through, counting 1, 2, 3, 4 until I get to the length of my response. And then I'm going to be getting a new variable, the item, from, notice how my response from these brackets, we can tell this is going to be some sort of an array, some sort of a collection of items. So that's why I'm iterating through, counting 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to its length. And so I'm going to be getting this item. And then, as a quick reminder, document keyword, I'm accessing my HTML document. And I'm getting an element by its ID, the content. And notice how when I create the script tag within the actual HTML, I don't need to specify like an external JavaScript file. And so it's automatically in here. So what I'm saying is I didn't have an extra script tag with the, with the SRC source attribute. I didn't need that because it's embedded in the HTML. So that's why I can still use the document keyword. I got this element by ID content. I've gotten this div up here in line 6. And I've gotten, so inner HTML is just like whatever is between these parentheses. So if I just type like whatever this is going to be the dot inner HTML. So remember the dot operator, I'm getting the content. This is my inner HTML. Okay. So once I've gotten that, I'm going to add to that a line break. So HTML, this is like a line break. And after that, I'm going to be getting the item volume info title. So a lot of operators here, but don't worry. I actually got this information, the item.volume info.title, from the Google Books website. I didn't have to go figure it out. Like any other good API, this tool taught me how to use its function, how to access things within it. Okay, so once I've gotten this, I'm basically what this function is doing is given a response, length of all my results to my search queries. I'm outputting it into my HTML, inserting a new line between each result. Okay, so now that we've interpreted my JavaScript function and what this is doing, the last thing here is this script tag. Now, look at this source. This is typically where we would insert our JavaScript file destination, the one that I've written. But as you can see here, this is a URL, just like one that you would expect to lead like somewhere on the web. So if I actually click on this, this is a ton of JavaScript in here. Someone else has written this JavaScript. This is the JavaScript for this API. So I am able to simply use this. First of all, because Google has made this free and public, you can't do this with just any code on the web. But because Google has made this free and public, I'm able to put this in my source as if that's the tool, that's functionalities that someone else has written and that I can now use. So if I open my files here and I actually open this HTML document, so something else you might notice is that when your HTML document is saved, it's saved as it'll have the icon of whatever browser you've set to be the default. And intuitively, that's because it'll open in your browser. So think of it like that way. Your HTML is just your website. Your styles, your CSS, and your JavaScript is just adding on to that. But now, if I open this, now before we look at that, if I open that, what I should be seeing, to reiterate, is the results. I've searched Harry Potter. So this is something that I've put in there. I searched Harry Potter, and now I'm going to output all of the results and separate them by lines. So now, let's see what it outputs. Okay, great. So this is really cool. What it's done is, if you remember in my HTML, I had one div with 0 content in it. But given all of this external, these external APIs, this functionality, it's automatically given me some output. Now, the putting a line break between things, that was my own code. But getting this output, notice I didn't use Google. How could I go from the words Harry Potter to this list of titles and series and things that's on my screen? This is the functionality that Google Books, that API, provided me. So this is just another really cool example of an API. You can have maps, you can have calculators, graphing functionalities, anything you can think of. Somebody has probably made it on the web and made it easy for you through an API to incorporate that functionality into your website. Okay, so that was a lot, but let me just put this in the chat real quick. If you're interested, Google Books API, just search this up. There will be simple tutorials, short articles teaching you how to put this into your own code. And if you're interested, I will also copy my own code using the APIs here. And feel free to use this as a model as you start dealing with APIs. Yeah. Okay, so one topic down, 2 more to go. That was our JavaScript related topic. Now, let's go on to the advanced topic related to HTML. Now, HTML is this functionality is quite similar to APIs actually, but it has to deal with HTML. It's what you call the HTTP methods, so get or post methods, if you guys have heard of those. If you don't, it's fine. I didn't even learn about this until I was actually starting high school. So you guys are way ahead of the game. But basically, let's see, there is one on here. Oh, see, yeah, W3 schools, I somehow missed this. They do have an HTML API section, so it'll teach you, there are some like trial ones with like a map. There's a drag drop web storage workers. I'm not quite sure what SSE is, but there's a lot of demo APIs that you can also try on here. And so these are probably easy to read as well. They even provide example code. Okay, but going back to what we were talking about, get and post methods. Basically, get and post methods are what's working in the background, how you interactively update information, grab information off the web and put it into your code and all of that. So as you can imagine, get and post are the 2 parts of this operation. One part I'm extracting information from some location. It might be another person's website. It might be an image, it might be a form. On the other hand, I have a post method. So through my input, through my keyboard, through my voice, through my camera, I'm somehow uploading information onto the web. And so these two things are embedded in the background of these APIs as part of the functionalities that they provide. They've also in the backend dealt with how your computer is communicating with another website. All of that is through get and post methods. However, we can also do this locally and see its effects as well. I don't have a demonstration for this, but it's easy to imagine if I open a form. Let's see, right down here. Okay. That's a really long list. Okay, so HTML forms, if you remember in our JavaScript lecture, we talked about how HTML forms are simply a combination of divs and spans, paragraphs, all of these things. And we specified lists like what, as well as what type of input could be in here. If you guys have forgotten, don't worry, feel free to go back anytime to look at the PowerPoint on JavaScript. But once we've locally created this, this form, I'm putting this on the web for someone else to input their information. When I submit this, okay, so when I submit this, this is just some like coding syntax. Don't worry about that. But basically, it says the server has processed your input and returned this answer, but to where? Look, the server. I, on my computer, I haven't accessed any server. The server is connected to the form. I just have my keyboard, I've typed something into it, and my server, the thing that's connected to the form, the thing that's powering the web, that thing has taken or gotten the information, that's the get method, and now it's going to post it onto the web. And this is a good segue into the second part of the advanced topics I was going to talk about. So these get and post methods, as well as a bunch of other complex ways that we process the input, it's really dealt with using PHP. So if we go back to HTML, you can see there's an entire section devoted to PHP. PHP is yet another front-end web development language. You'll see there's a ton of them, really. And sorry, and PHP is really dealing with a lot of the back end. A lot of people aren't gonna be really well versed in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP, and for example, React, jQuery, Django. Don't worry, these are all specialties. Like if you actually decide to pursue web development in the future, nobody is gonna have a really good understanding of all of these domains. For our purposes, even I don't know how to code in PHP. I just know in general what it's for and how to interpret code and use it. So as you can see, PHP in this demo code looks a lot like HTML. The reason for that is because it's closely related to what part of the HTML is interacting with the server. Is it getting information? Is it posting information? And right, okay, let's look at how the PHP in the backend, this is the get and post methods, how it handles the forms like in the previous example. Now, PHP, let's see, right here, see, it has the keyword. So first of all, it's gonna welcome you. It's gonna, don't worry, these are just like language specific things. This one as well, this as well, but this is really key. Look, it says post. It's posting your name. So somewhere above or somewhere in the backend, it's already gotten the information that you submitted in the form. And up here, it's, for example, stored your name that you've inputted into a name variable. It's stored your email into an email variable. After that, it's going to use the post method. So it's going to print out, it's going to display, it's going to render on your screen, welcome. After that, it's going to show using the post method name, the variable that it's stored in. And then it's also going to output your email addresses and then post again your email. So the output should look like this, given the form example that we were talking about in the previous section. And same thing using HTTP GET method. So this is the part where it was storing the information. So this is the really key line here. So in PHP, you're going to have a form. So see, it's corresponding to the HTML forms. Now it's going to have some action, language specific things. This is like a function, think of it that way. But look, a method, the HTTP methods, the two most basic ones, get and post. It's going to use the get method to actually get all of this information. And then afterwards, like this, it's going to use the get keyword. It's going to get this, and then it's going to post. Alternatively, I think PHP also supports like just putting get here, but I digress. So really what you need to take away from the HTTP methods is that whenever you're working with HTML, especially interacting with other websites, if you run into a bug, an error, and especially if content is not loading and that content came from somewhere else, that's going to be an issue with your get and post methods, most likely. And the reason that this is so useful is that recognizing this, first of all, saves you a lot of time debugging your actual code, which a lot of time is perfectly fine. And the other reason that I mentioned this is because PHP in itself is a complete language. It has syntax, comments, variables, data types, strings, numbers, math, all of these things. But really, you can experiment with writing your own PHP code to maybe fix some sort of functionalities, to post something, to get a method from your forms, which are the most simple ways that people start off by doing interactive things. And so, yeah, it saves you a lot of time, allows you more flexibility in how your program is communicating with the server, how the server is communicating with a different website. And yeah, so that's our second advanced topic for today, HTTP methods slash PHP. Okay, now we've gone through the JavaScript, we've gone through the HTML. The last thing we're going to talk about today, okay, we might actually end a bit early today. So yeah, I was expecting more questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to type in the chat or speak up or whatever. But our last topic for today is related to CSS. It's actually something called Twitter Bootstrap. So it's actually right here in W3 Schools, this Bootstrap tab here. Officially, it's Twitter Bootstrap. So it was designed by Twitter. Think of it like an API. It's a framework for CSS that Twitter designed and put out here for all of us to use. And yeah, this is true. Bootstrap is the world's most famous and free CSS framework. So you can download all of these, or okay, let me just go in here, Bootstrap 5, and show you guys. Okay, so before we start talking about Bootstrap specifically, let me show you guys why Bootstrap is so powerful and so useful. It's because of something called responsive design. As soon as you start dealing with CSS, you're going to start hearing the words just responsive design all over the place. And what it is basically, how is your website, how is your content going to show on different sized screens? So right now, I'm actually on a monitor. So what I'm seeing is probably different from what you're seeing on your screen. But let me settle this and make it smaller. So immediately you can see, let's cover that up. So immediately you can see that this is a lot smaller and it looked different from when it was a full screen. Notice carefully on the left side here, on the left, we used to have a menu. Now, as I slowly expand this, at some point, it's suddenly going to pop out right there. So see, if I go back, it disappears, make it slightly bigger, and it shows this menu. And the reason for that is because of things called breakpoints. In responsive design, breakpoints are certain sizes that you specify for your screen. And you're basically creating a whole different set of CSS for each breakpoint, for each screen size or interval of sizes. So right now, I actually don't know how big this is. So let's go Google inspect elements. If I inspect element right now, if you're on computer, it's Control-Shift-I, or if you're on Mac, I think it's Command-Shift-I, or maybe Alt, I'm not sure. Just quickly Google like how you inspect element. This is really cool. One of the things that it'll show you is, okay, I actually don't know where it is right now, but, oh, oh, right here. So if you hover over, remember this is the box layout we were talking about with CSS, this very center, highlighted in blue, this is my actual content. So look at the numbers inside of here, 593 times 6,000. So right now on my screen, really just focus on the first number. This width of my screen right now is 593, about 600. And I suspect, for example, as I make this smaller, watch this number right here, this 593. It's going to get smaller and smaller, 550, 526. And so from this, I'm suspecting that this breakpoint is going to be 600. So the breakpoint that this, okay, let's go to 600, or maybe not, 650 maybe. So, okay, 7. Oh, let's see. Oh, okay, right there. So, okay, it's actually because I have this Google inspect element bar on the right open. If I didn't, so this 1073 pixels is how big my screen is, including this bar. Without this bar, it's a lot smaller. So it would be around, I'm saying like 700 pixels. So around there is when this menu suddenly pops out. And that's what breakpoints and responsive design is. So if I, just again, if I make this really small, it's going to disappear. You can notice at the top as well, how many of these languages, these tabs at the top are showing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are showing right now. If I make this bigger, okay, it's going to start showing more PHP Bootstrap, how to, it's going to start showing all of these things that weren't there before. And this is the essence of any website that you are going to design. This is the essence of why Bootstrap was developed. It's because of this responsive design. Imagine trying to fit this sort of content, a menu, plus like all of this content, 3 columns of content in here, plus ads on the side, trying to fit all of this on your tiny phone screen. Just imagine that. How are you going to read any of this? You're not going to be able to. So that's why when you go down small enough, for example, the menu disappears. It's going to have menus on the sides that you can click on this button to show. Your ads are going to go to the bottom right here. It's going to be designed in such a way that everything is still readable and still navigable. So this is what this is why a lot of websites nowadays, really all good websites are going to use a method called mobile first design, which is to say that when you start designing a website, you're going to focus on the phone first, because so many people use phones. Oh, it actually says right here, mobile first websites. So many people access things on their phones, social media, especially links are sent through phones. They're going to see your website a lot of the time, starting from their phone. So you want to give them a good impression and just make it usable on someone's phone. And that's why people start designing websites with the phone size in mind. You start by designing that because it's always easier to go from a smaller screen to a bigger one. I start here with my menu as a button on the side. If I get big enough, well, now I have more flexibility. I can add my menu on the side. I can add my ads on the side. It's easier to go big than to go small. So this is why when people start working with CSS, they start designing as if they're in a tiny phone screen. And from there, they can add different edits depending on the size. And that's all what Bootstrap is about. The reason that Bootstrap is so famous and so useful is because it's designed in such a way that you don't have to specify, oh, okay, at 941 pixels, I'm going to do this. At 816 pixels, I'm going to do that. It hides a lot of that stuff, so it makes it easier. The Bootstrap framework has already established a few pre-existing breakpoints. So if my memory is correct, at around 350 pixels, it's automatically going to change some sort of features for you. At, for example, 600 pixels, it's going to change other features for you, add more detail on the sides. And it'll give you reminders to do that. So that's why Bootstrap is so nice. The other thing nice about Bootstrap is the grid layout. So Bootstrap is, okay, maybe I should have mentioned this at first, but Bootstrap is just CSS. It's like pages and pages and pages of CSS that other people, other developers at Twitter have already written. So when you download that, you can import that into your CSS documents. You can use it elsewhere. But basically, it's just CSS within itself. And it provides like spaces. Think of them like fill in the blank, like a fill in the blank CSS file, where you're going to fill in your own colors and fonts and image sizes and all of those things into its framework. That's why it's so powerful. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about with Bootstrap is going back to this grid layout. As you can see here, okay, this is a really good demo on W3 Schools. So this is the biggest, let's run this. And so okay, yeah, right there. So let's make this bigger. So this demo here is going to show you, oh, okay, this is nice. So my monitor is currently 1414 pixels wide, and it has 3 columns here. Maybe this is like some news article, a news website, where it's going to have 3 columns of information. Now, this works fine when I have a really big screen, but when I make it smaller and smaller and smaller, notice how each of them are getting smaller at the same rate. It's not like, and another big thing is, so notice how the width of the columns themselves are actually not changing. It's the margins between them that's actually getting squashed. That's a really important feature. You don't want your text constantly shrinking based on every single pixel size. That's really, really complex and a lot of information and redundant code. At 1005 pixels, your text is going to be like 20.9934 pixels. At 1004 pixels, you're going to be 29.745 pixels. You don't want that. So instead of that, your text isn't shrinking. However, when their columns aren't shrinking until you get to a breakpoint, right here, when you get to a breakpoint, see how it jumps a little bit right there. At 990 pixels, it jumps a little bit. Each of the columns suddenly get smaller. That's why breakpoints are so powerful. You set a certain style at a certain interval, and Bootstrap takes care of that for you. Now, so far, we've seen how each column has changed within itself. But now let's see how these 3 columns together change. So if I make this small enough, at some point you can imagine on a phone screen, you aren't going to have enough space for 3 columns of information on your phone. So if I shrink this enough, bam, it's going to turn into, the columns are now going to turn into like paragraphs that stack on top of one another. This makes it so much more readable and yet preserves the organization that we want. And Bootstrap is a tool that does this for you because, okay, so the grid layout, I still haven't gotten to that. So the grid layout, every single Bootstrap page has 12 grids, 12 columns. So in this case, I have 3 columns here, but in the background, Bootstrap actually has 12. So imagine 12 divided by 3, you're going to have 4 columns essentially behind each of these that are showing. The reason they chose the number 12 is because it's divisible by basically, it's divisible by a lot of numbers, right? So you can have divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, so that you can have one column, you can have 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns, 6 columns, or maybe even 12 columns on your web page. And for most people, that's enough. Like, most people are not going to have a problem using 4 columns as opposed to 4, or maybe 4 columns as opposed to 5. Or if they wanted to use, I don't know, 7 columns, you could somehow make your content into 6. The number 12 is chosen because it's small enough to also have enough flexibility. And the default is 12 columns, but I can specify, okay, because I want 3 columns, I'm going to give each column a size of 4 columns. And when it gets small enough, I want each column to suddenly turn into taking 12 grids, 12 columns, 12 columns in the Bootstrap grid layout. So Bootstrap has laid out this grid, like a coordinate grid, that you can specify to really almost sort of draw out how your columns are going to look. And the last thing that I'll mention before we end a little bit early today is that there's wrapping or overflow. When you have too many columns and you haven't set certain breakpoints, Bootstrap also makes sure that your website doesn't just crash. You're not going to have text overlapping with text, columns overlapping with columns when your screen gets too small. Instead, you're going to have, so for example, when I get down to a small enough size, this web page has been programmed so that they all stack on top of one another. But let's say that I didn't have this sort of feature. I specify that at a certain size, I'm going to go down to 2 columns. But what about the third? Now I have 2 columns per row, but like an odd one out. Bootstrap automatically takes care of that. It bumps it to the next line so that you essentially have a column 1 here, column 2 here, and then column 3 would be right here with some blank space underneath column 2. So while that blank space might be a little bit awkward, it's still preferable to having your text overlapping. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, Bootstrap is just going to be a tool for responsive design. It's going to take care of your CSS, making things readable, making things visually appealing based on a certain size. And it provides a grid layout that makes it really easy to organize your sizes and make them flexible at a bunch of different breakpoints. So yeah, to recap today, we talked about 3 advanced topics, I guess, one for each language. HTML, we talked about the HTTP methods, get and post, and PHP, how it works in the background. For CSS, we talked about Bootstrap, Twitter Bootstrap, responsive design, and the grid layout. And then for JavaScript, we talked briefly about APIs and how the interactivity can expand to not just your website, but using other websites' functionalities as well. And as always, I recommend that you guys check out W3 Schools. Everything I've talked about really, except for maybe APIs, is on here in much more depth than we have time to go over. So yeah, I encourage you guys to go look at this, and I hope that was an interesting lesson. Don't worry about any of the code. Just understand the concepts, know that these tools are there, and yeah. So next week, we're gonna be going over like combining our, like what we've learned before, doing a little bit of review. We have 3 more class sessions left, I believe. And what we're gonna try and accomplish, 2 more class sessions actually. Is that right? We have 2 more class sessions left. Right. So we're gonna start off next class by doing a little bit of review about HTML, CSS, JavaScript in case you guys have forgotten, or we can skip that if you don't need it. But before we end today, since I guess the 6 of you regulars are here, let's vote on something like what sort of end of class project you guys want to work on. In the class summary description that the Cloud Classroom sent out, we provided 2 options. One we could just start designing a website. Like you guys could code away, ask me questions. I could show you guys cool features that you guys can add at different places in your website. That's one option. So just creating your own website from scratch. Although I personally don't think that we have enough time within 2 class periods to do a lot. The other option would be for me to actually take you through a project for the Cloud Classroom website that I'm actually working on. So maybe we can replicate some things or some parts of the website, and we can code through it together. So as I'm coding, you guys can work along as well. You guys can give me suggestions, inputs, and as long as you guys have your own IDEs, I can tell you guys the task and you guys can create your own version of the exact same thing as well. We can compare the code, and at the very end, I'll make final edits, of course, but we'll be putting this stuff onto the actual Cloud Classroom website, or at least recreating some of the elements that are already on there. So yeah, just as a preliminary to get a sense of what you guys want to do, maybe like type in the chat or to everyone or just to me what you guys would like to do for the next 2 class sessions, what projects you would like to work on. And yeah. So first option, just working on your own website, coding from scratch. Second option is working through some features with me, replicating some things on the Cloud Classroom website for the purposes of eventually putting things onto the website. Okay, great. I have one response so far. And if you guys are curious what, okay, 2 responses, great. If you guys are curious what specifically that is, I'm thinking of, so there is a almost like a reviews bar section thing on the Cloud Classroom website that automatically shuffles through and shows like students' comments about their classes and things. So it would be a really cool combination of HTML. The styles would be moderately complex for each of the parts, and then it would be cool to see the functionalities. So yeah. 2 responses. If you guys, don't worry, like I'm putting you guys on the spot, but if you guys don't know what you want, we can definitely talk next time as well. Feel free to message me or Joseph or the Cloud Classroom between classes as well. But yeah, if you guys have given me your response, feel free to like go, and I'll see you guys next class.